welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm your host, Jessica, and I am really happy to welcome Megan Barnard, the author of The Winter Goddess. Welcome to Syosset Library.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Books that are expanded, myths, retellings are super popular and super fun, as well as a mythology buff myself. I love learning about different mythologies. I have to say this was one that I was not as familiar with as others, although I was familiar with some of the Pantheon, not so much this particular goddess. But please tell us a little bit about this book and where it came from for you.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to talk about it. As you said, a huge fan of any book that has to do with mythologies, older gods, there's been a lot of Greek and Roman myth retellings lately, and I have like every single one. I see it on the shelf and I buy it. Um, but I was interested in doing kind of some mythologies and some pantheons that I haven't seen explored as much. So I was looking at the Irish Pantheon of gods, specifically the Tuatha De Danann is what many people call them. But my book, The Winter Goddess, takes place, the main character Cailleach is one of the gods of the Tuatha De Danann, and essentially she sends an eternal winter over Ireland specifically. And then she's punished by her mother, Danu, who's the queen of the gods, to live and die as immortal until she understands the value of human life and what it means to be a human. Because for Cailleach, she's never even had something like she's never had mud on her skin. Her skin doesn't get dirty. She's never felt cold rain or anything that she doesn't want to feel, pain, loss, things like that. She hasn't really had much discovery of for the most part. Yeah, so I delved into her story and I was interested in it for many reasons. As I said, I love mythologies, retellings and things like that, but I have Irish ancestry, like so many people in the US do. My great-grandparents immigrated through Ellis Island in the 1920s. And so those kind of like the stories and songs have kind of filtered down through my family. My mom learned a little Irish growing up. I learned a little bit myself, though I don't remember it now. And we always kind of heard stories. It wasn't necessarily mythologies, but it was like old stories. Like, we had a great uncle who died on the Irish Sea, and one, who had to run, who was possibly part of the IRA, we're not sure. Just people, who did things, who were in this place that was so different yet felt very familiar to me. So I've been writing stories set in Ireland since the time I started writing, at 7, 8 years old. And I went there for the first time myself when I was 19, and I had this kind of really unique experience of like the first time I set foot on the tarmac. We deplaned right on the tarmac, and I got out and I smelled the air and like the salt in the air and the scent of it. And I felt like I'd like come home. And it was a really amazing feeling. So I kind of wanted to explore that, but also explore, the hardships that would have existed at this time in pre-Christianity Ireland, for Cailleach and the people around her. And that's kind of where I got started and then where I went from there.
It felt very earthy for a book that is based in mythology. And as somebody, I've been to Ireland twice. I would love to go back. You caught it perfectly. Um, I enjoyed just kind of the balance between the idea of humanity, the idea of divinity, and just sort of the way that it worked, because it was interesting that Cailleach's mother wanted her to understand humanity better but she didn't necessarily understand it as much herself. And I thought
Yeah.
that that was really interesting. And in a way, like that almost led to how callous Cailleach became, because in the beginning you see her connecting with humans a
Yeah.
bit. And then, it was almost like that experience in and of itself could have tipped her in a better direction, but it tipped her
Yeah.
in the complete opposite. So I thought that that was really just a very interesting place for her journey to start.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was kind of, an exploration for me to discover that too. Because I think, as you said, it's, finding that balance between mortality and immortality. And if you're a god and you have endless power, endless pleasure, it's almost like, why would you care about mortals? Why would you like what's the point? You don't have a need to, you don't understand selfishness or selflessness because you live in this kind of idyll. But yeah, it was fun and interesting to explore. And as you say, that relationship between Danu and Cailleach, especially because Danu, she thinks of herself as this kind of like bountiful mother goddess. She thinks of herself as empathetic and loving, and that she cares for these humans, but she kind of cares for them in the way that someone might like care for a doll that they loved as a kid, and then they grow up and they forget about the doll, but it doesn't matter because it's a doll, what's going to happen to it. But she has that kind of that that strange mix of care and callousness, that Cailleach kind of finds hypocritical as she grows older, and as she learns really about mortals, and what it actually means. The gods often they'll talk about, oh, what it's like to eat a strawberry that you grow from your own hand. But like they haven't had that happen in so long. They don't really remember. They remember the pleasure of it, not the work that went into it. And so a lot of this book I kind of wanted to show, but it's like it is hard to be immortal now. Obviously, it's hard to be immortal then. It's not just like, oh, the sweat of your brow. It's like this is backbreaking sometimes and heartbreaking, to be a human.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was very interesting to play with that idea because you did, like you said, you had Danu who really wanted to quote unquote teach Cailleach the error of her ways, but the error of her ways built the monster that became
Yeah.
Cailleach, just it was really interesting. How did you build each part of her story, like each death, each relationship, each development? Uh, did it all flow very naturally for you? Did you do a lot of outlining?
Yeah, it did not flow naturally, I would say. So as you said, it's a complicated book because there are, many lives, many deaths. And I'd had the idea for a novel about Cailleach years before I wrote it. I was reading Wintering by Catherine May, which is an amazingly good book. Everyone should read it. And she mentioned very briefly the Cailleach, who's, the Irish goddess of winter and many other mythologies. So I had this idea of a goddess, but I couldn't quite get it right in my head until I realized that for me, and in some old stories, she's a goddess who's a goddess and then becomes mortal for a while. Um, so I played around with the idea probably for years, writing little snippets back and forth. But for me, a lot of my writing, it's very like voice driven. If I don't have the voice right of the character in my head, I can't get it. And I was having a hard time, like again, as I said, how do you make a goddess relatable? So part of her, becoming mortal helped that. But it wasn't until I came up with the idea of her living and dying those 7 times that it did work. And then from there, I did plot it out. I had, the people she meets in each life, how she dies in each life. And from there, I was able to much more clearly write it. There was, I think, of the 7 lives, there was only one I ended up kind of totally redoing. But the rest of them were very similar from the beginning to the end, in terms of the dog she meets or the people she falls in love with or the child she has.
That's very interesting. And the number seven, was that, I mean, number seven comes up very often in mythology and fairy tales, and also the number three. Was there a reason you
Yeah.
chose that specifically?
Um, so in my research, I clearly remember reading that there's an old story about Cailleach living 7 times or living over and over as immortal. I can't find the book I read it in anymore, but I do remember that and it was really clear in my head that I wanted it to be seven because as you say, in a lot of old stories, mythologies, seven is a very magically important number or religiously important. And so we actually kind of toyed around with cutting it down to like 6 lives and deaths, because at one point we were like, well, maybe we can expand this life. I was talking to my editor. But in the end, I tried to do that and I was like, no, this isn't right. Like it has to be seven. And I'm not even quite sure why. It just felt, right to me as a writer to have it be that many times. There was something that felt very full circle about it. Maybe part of it's the fact I'm one of seven. I have six siblings, so I'm one of seven myself. So I think maybe that tied into it. The number seven has always been important to me. Yeah, but it was interesting because that was something I decided we really needed to keep in the book overall.
Yeah, very cool. It felt very natural to me reading it as well. I really did love sort of each life and each lesson and each death and each connection. Was there one, though, that was more difficult for you to write than the other, either emotionally or just in general?
Um, eh, Cailleach's second life, she has a dog that she kind of rescues from the wood. That's probably the hardest for me because I don't want to give spoilers away. But she grows to really love and care for this dog, and I based him strongly on my own dog. I have a Sheltie who's brown and white. His name is Pippin. And I just kind of put him in the book because he sits with me when I write. I'm always looking at him. So he's kind of my constant companion in the same way that Cailleach's dog became hers. So that one was really difficult to write. Um, there's a lot of death in the book. It's kind of the point of it. So there was, certainly some sadness with, Cailleach's life ending and then her not having this connection, the characters she knew, the people she knew not being alive anymore often. Um, but probably, so yeah, I would say life two was quite difficult. And then, um, maybe life three, so kind of the middle lives, life two and then life three, because she meets a woman named Anya, who she falls in love with. And it's kind of the first time she loves a mortal for the first time in, hundreds of years. And losing that, and there's, betrayal and things like that that make that make it difficult to write. Because I think everyone has had a time where they've been betrayed either by, a lover, a friend, a family member. And I feel like the sting of that can be worse in some ways than losing someone, to a death if it's, a happy relationship. So sorting through those feelings as Cailleach does in her third life and fourth life, and really the rest of her lives, is always kind of interesting, but can be difficult, was difficult to write about.
I can see that. And, some of those were tipping points in a way. I do feel like finding the love of a pet is a very specific type of humbling experience. So I see where you're coming from with that one.
Yeah, it definitely is. I had animals, pets growing up, but they were family pets. And so when my husband and I got our dog during the pandemic, like many people did, it was wild to suddenly realize, oh, I'm like fully responsible for this creature. Before it had always been my siblings. I knew if I didn't feed the dog, my parents would. But as an adult getting a pet for the same time, I was like, I am responsible for this. And it felt, yeah, as you said, very humbling. I hadn't had children at that point. I now have a 3-month-old, so I get it even more. But yeah, it was. And I remember feeling like very vulnerable, like talking about him and caring for him, just that feeling of like, yeah, I can only describe it really as vulnerability. And I think it's really beautiful and moving. And I think most people have a connection to animals in some, there are certainly people who don't love animals, but in some connection to to the natural world, animals, a tree they love, flowers, anything like that, I think can touch our hearts in the way that it's harder for humans are, it's harder to let other people in sometimes because we know they can hurt us, but animals don't do that. They love you. I mean, maybe not cats always, but in whatever way they do.
Would you return to writing another book about this pantheon?
That's a great question. So I don't think I would have returned to writing a book about Cailleach herself. For me, her story seems very finished and complete. I could definitely see myself returning to this pantheon. In this story, a lot of what I explored is based in the mortal world. We see the pantheon, but we don't see them as much. A lot of it, it's really a story about humanity and how this one goddess interacts with them. But I found many of the other gods to be really fascinating characters. Danu herself, I would love to explore deeper, maybe in a different iteration of Danu, maybe. I love stories where, in one book, one thing happens and it's a tipping point. I could see another book where something different happens and Danu is different or her life changes. Because I find, as I said, the Pantheon fascinating, and I think there's not enough, we don't have a lot of books about it a lot often because that knowledge was destroyed or was passed down orally and we lost it. So I think it gives a lot of room to kind of explore and kind of remember these old gods and goddesses. Plus, I love writing about, powerful, angry women. My first book was about Queen Jezebel from the Bible and it was kind of a feminist retelling of her story. So I could definitely see writing about Danu, maybe writing about the other gods. But we'll see.
Are you working on something new at the moment?
I am, yeah. I'm working on something sort of, well, a little bit different, but a little bit the same. I always tend to write about women. I grew up in a family of really strong women. I have four sisters, and my mother's a doctor. I have a lot of aunts. Um, so I'm working on a book that's set in kind of, multiple timelines. It's set in England, right when Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, takes the throne in France during the Belle Epoque, and then sorry, French people if I said that wrong. And then in the US in the future in about 2100. So and it kind of has themes of motherhood and maternity because as I said, I just had a baby 4 months ago, so it's been on my mind. So we'll see what happens with it, but it's really fun right now, and I'm enjoying weaving these, historical stories, which I've done a lot of with a little bit of this, future stories that has a little bit of a dystopian edge to it.
Man, that sounds really cool and quite different from your other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I do find it different. I think it's still really character driven, which for me I think is what a lot of my stories are. They don't tend to be, really high action packed, but it definitely still focuses on kind of these same threads. Kind of I think of like what do we owe to each other? What does it mean to be a woman in a world where you are powerless, which, in the past certainly women have been for so long. And it focuses on these strong female characters and what they do with kind of the life they're given. We'll see what happens to it. You never quite know with a book. It can go in so many different directions, but it's been really fun to work on.
Awesome. Well, Megan, this has been wonderful. The Winter Goddess was lovely. Can't wait to see what else you work on. What are you reading right now? That's actually a question that I do like to ask authors because it's always interesting to hear what you're reading.
Oh yeah, I love talking about what I'm reading. Funnily enough, I read a lot of books at the same time, and I always have. So I'm reading currently, I somehow got myself in like a dystopian kick. I think many things going on with the world, but I was also watching Severance, the show, which I think got me kind of in the mood for it. Great show, by the way. Everyone should watch it. It's wild. But so I am reading the new Hunger Games book, Sunrise on the Reaping, because of course I grew up with Hunger Games. I first read the first one when I was 13 or 14. So I'm reading the new Hunger Games book, which is wildly sad as all Hunger Games books are, but also, it's a fun, well, I don't know if it's fun. It's a quick read. It definitely hits different as an adult reading it than as a kid. I remember thinking the Hunger Games as a kid. I was like, this is, a fun romp. It's exciting. It's an adventure. There's bows and arrows. That's fun. And now as an adult, I'm like, oh, this is grim. This is very, very grim. But I am enjoying reading that. I'm listening to the audiobook of I just finished The Giver again by Lois Lowry. I'd read it again as a child. I wanted to pick it up again. Wow, The Giver holds up. And I didn't realize there were actually other ones in the series. So now I'm listening to the audiobook of Sun, which is like the fourth book in the Giver quartet, which is really interesting. It's from the side of like the birth mothers in this strange community, and I'm really enjoying that. Um, I just something kind of different. I just read Raising Hair, which is a book about a woman. It's a memoir about a woman who found wild hare essentially in her backyard, who lived in England during the pandemic and raised it, took care of it, and her relationship with this hare. And it's really, really beautiful. I love nature memoirs, anything similar to that. And then I'm about to start, well, I've kind of already started Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte Conahy, I think that's how you pronounce it. That's set kind of on a like not fully deserted island in the Arctic with this woman who washes ashore. And let me tell you, anything set by a shore, by the sea, I will buy it. Doesn't matter what it's about. If you tell me there's a Wild Dark Shore, I will read it. So those are my current reads.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Like I said before, check out The Winter Goddess, check out Jezebel. Can't wait to see what you've got up next, Megan. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.